Still Waters, Rising Tide by Jaclynn. Part 1. Mingyu. Chapter 1. The Coldest Words.
The railing was made of treated steel, but to Ming Yue it felt like bone, cold, ridged, and final. She sat resting her weight against the outside edge, her legs dangling over the river. She made no move to adjust her long, straight black hair, which fell across the pale oval of her face, obscuring the view of the traffic. The dark, cold river meandering its way to the coast and the sea beyond. Her thin lips remained perfectly still. The world above, the bridge, the faint sound of horns, the frantic, muffled shouts of the people gathering was irrelevant chaos. Her world had collapsed into a pinprick of focus. Her toes still against the cold concrete and the sluggish black movement of the water below. It was the only motion less painful than the motion of her life. Her mind was no longer a sanctuary. It was a tight, tiled room echoing with a constant, looping contempt. The voice was Han Yu's, always controlled, always precise. The final scene, played on repeat, had been over a ridiculous social gaffe. She had merely mixed up the name of a business associate's wife, a tiny, harmless lapse in memory at a dinner Han Yu considered crucial. But to him, any imperfection was a hostile act, a betrayal, an act of sabotage. She could hear his voice now, echoing in the wind, closer than her own breath. "Did you even try to remember? Or is that too much effort for you? You look utterly miserable, sitting there like a funeral portrait. Smile, Ming Yue. You are my wife. You reflect on me." His contempt was subtle, yet absolute. He didn't scream. He simply informed her of her worthlessness, leaning close enough that the expensive scent of his cologne filled her senses, trapping her in the moment. "Good-for-nothing woman," the voice scraped, high and tight. "You're pathetic. Do you know what the others call you? The Ice Maiden, the Hag. 5 years and you're still a coldfish. Useless wife." The insults had 5 years of history behind them. They were the sum total of his emotional abstinence. He had demanded an immaculate, smiling corporate accessory, and when she failed, he systematically starved her of warmth, only to blame her for the resulting emotional frostbite. His relentless womanizing and infidelity, often subtly flaunted, were simply another way to tell her she was insufficient, that her deepest needs were a pathetic joke. She had absorbed the contempt until it became her truth. The worst part was the calculation. She knew the cruelty was deliberate. It wasn't simple anger. It was a tool designed to erode her will, making her compliant in his grand scheme to control the family assets. He targeted her soul because he couldn't target her legal will. The emotional abuse was a precise, targeted attack on her financial independence. She thought of the final exchange, a sharp dismissal after the party. He hadn't raised his voice, but the look, cold and clinical, had been worse than any physical strike. "Go to the guest room," he'd ordered, waving a dismissal with his manicured hand. "I can't bear the sight of your disappointment right now. You are an inconvenience, Ming Yue, a failed experiment." That look was the last blow. It was the spiritual death. The moment she realized her quiet hope for simple human kindness was a fool's delusion. The barrage of words, coupled with the profound emotional neglect, had hit her bodily and spiritually at once. She chose the river not for drama, but for silence. She had nothing left to lose, only the agonizing static of existence to end. She prepared to surrender. The silence was ruptured by the shock of invasion. Strong hands, large, unfamiliar, and violently warm, gripped her waist and shoulders. The sudden chaotic touch of strangers after years of Han Yu's deliberate cold distance was an unbearable violation. It was too much sensation, too much noise, too much chaos. Her brain, overloaded and desperate for the void, executed the only viable escape: total self-preservation. She went instantly rigid, then limp. She fell into a protective, catatonic state, her eyes wide, dark and vacant, seeing nothing. Surrounding her was a chaos of lights and sounds, like exclamation points emphasizing the urgency and anxiety of the gathering crowd. The high-pitched sirens, Deep, masculine shouts and hurried movements were a distant, meaningless pressure. She covered her face and ears with palms, damp from sweat and shaking from fear, physically trying to shut out the hostile intrusion of the barrage of questions from the first responders. When questioned by the first responders, she did not respond. Her name, Ming Yue, was irrelevant. She was pulled from the scene, stripped of consciousness and stripped of identity. She was simply labelled, in the cold formality of the intake reports, the unknown patient. The ambulance ride was silent for her. She saw the city lights, the sharp, high-contrast urban environment of Han Yu's kingdom, blur and retreat outside the window. The cold ambition and sterile perfection she was running from disappeared. She was brought into the low-lit reception area of the institute. The air here was still and smelled faintly of clean linen and disinfectant. It was clinical, yes, but devoid of the demanding, judging eyes she had known. The staff were professional, assessing her paleness, her unresponsiveness, her severe emotional withdrawal. They saw her depression. They did not condemn it. She was wheeled into a simple, low-lit room. The noise stopped. The demands stopped. In the final, profound moment before deeper sleep took her, Mingyue registered the absence of threat. Her profound silence, which Han Yu had savagely punished, was now accepted. This grey, quiet place, meant for breakdown, held the first flicker of safety.
Chapter 2. The Grade World.
Yue lay on the hospital-grade bed, covered by a pale, thin blanket. Her mind, though catatonic to the external world, was not silent. It had simply retreated from the bridge to the cold, echoing spaces of the life she had abandoned. Her memory flickered, catching on moments of the world Han Yu had built. The abuse in Han Yu's environment was never a clumsy, desperate thing. It was executed with almost clinical precision. Their penthouse was a masterpiece of modern brutalist architecture, all sharp angles, polished chrome, and cold marble surfaces. The wealth was suffocating, Mingyue's memory fixated on Han Yu himself. His perfectly tailored dark suit, the precise cut of his hair, and the chilling immobility of his narrow lips. Even when he was delivering the cruelest verbal cuts, his face remained largely unchanged, cold and calculating. That controlled, sophisticated fury was exponentially more terrifying than a shout. She remembered shrinking into herself, her paleness, her quiet sorrow, a dull, quiet thing against the backdrop of his flawless, sharp perfection. His anger was always aimed at her failure to perform, but that anger was tied to a larger, more crucial objective, the complete and utter destruction of her person. Her recollection morphed. Her memory of days past were slideshows of documents, property deeds and titles, and her sprawling family inheritance. She realized with agonizing clarity that the 5 years of marriage were never about her being a wife, but about her function as an asset. She was merely the vessel tied to the immense property he craved. The insults, the emotional beatings, the constant chipping away at her dignity, all of it was designed to erode her will, making it easier for him to control the one thing he truly valued. Her existence, in his eyes, was entirely external, tied to that wealth. She was simply the boundary that contained his ambition. In the institutional wing, Mingyue was observed and assessed. It was the strangest relief. 2 middle-aged staff members spoke in hushed, professional tones. They recorded her vitals, noted the severe paleness of her face, the slackness of her thin lips, and the vacant stare of her almond-shaped eyes. They discussed her potential undiagnosed clinical depression and the severity of her catatonia. Yet, Mingyue sensed no malice, no judgment, and no demand for performance. Her silence, which had brought such contempt from her husband, here only brought a soft nod and professional note-taking. This clinical observation was the first safe interaction she'd had in years. A purely objective assessment, not a moral one. The nurse's touch, though impersonal, carried no threat. The silence was accepted. The outside world, the world defined by Han Yu, the brutal, demanding, high-contrast city life defined, was now truly gone. It was as though she had travelled through a wormhole created by the ambulance transport and briskly rolling stretcher, passing through corridors illuminated by stark white overhead lights. All that was left was the institution. She had nowhere left to run, nowhere left to hide, except inside the confines of this unexpected, non-judgmental silence.
Chapter 3. The Sanctuary of Stillness.
The institutional wing's inner sanctum was not the cold, grey dumping ground Mingyue's fractured mind had expected. It was a space designed for the absence of threat. The walls were soft, pale colours, not sterile white, but a muted, peaceful grey-yellow. The furniture was simple, with rounded, padded edges and non-threatening. There were no sharp corners, no polished chrome reflecting aggressive light, none of the angular perfection that had defined Han Yu's home. The air was clean, the light filtered, and the sound minimal. Mingyue drifted through the large common room, sitting sometimes, standing sometimes, remaining mostly still. Her stillness was like a protective barrier, blocking out all sensory projections. She existed in an emotionless vacuum. It was a manufactured bubble purposefully designed to be void of noise, irritation. Even the lighting was gently filtered source of illumination, casting soft grey shadows on the floor. The environment was engineered to produce a feeling of safety, comfort, to induce calm and healing. Her mind was in a state of catatonic safety. She realized the unspoken contract of this place. No one demanded conversation, no one demanded an opinion, and no one demanded a smile. Her withdrawal, which Han Yu had savagely punished, was here accepted and protected. It was in this communal, protective silence that she first registered Zheng. He was sitting at a simple wooden table by the window, his form slouched, not reading, but merely existing. He was another figure of stillness, but his stillness was different from hers. Hers was the surrender of trauma. His was the profound weight of exhaustion. Mingyue registered his physical presence first. The squareness of his jaw and the seriousness in his profile suggested a man used to immense control, but under his dark, layered hair and prominent cheekbones, there were profound, heavy shadows under his eyes. His rumpled, loose white t-shirt and dark trousers spoke of a breakdown that had stripped him of his own carefully constructed armor. He was wounded, but his controlled demeanor contained no threat. She registered him only as a shape, a ghost sharing her silence. He was a fellow victim of the outside world, and in that shared suffering, she found the first sense of not being utterly alone. The late afternoon sun broke through the muted window. The light was filtered, gentle, and warm. It settled over Mingyue as she rested on a low sofa. In that profound moment of acceptance, the realization settled. This grey, quiet place, meant for breakdown, was the only safe haven she had ever known. It felt like a single, miraculous shaft of sun bursting through grey rain clouds. An undeniable oasis of calm. The spiritual wound was still open, but finally, the desperate, ceaseless bleeding had stopped.
Part 2. Zheng. Chapter 4. The Heir's Burden.
Zheng's earliest memories were not of a loving home, but of a sprawling, echoing mansion that felt perpetually cold and vast. The family fortune was not a comfort, it was a battleground. His father, a noted philanderer, was a distant figure. His attention fragmented across countless mistresses and illegitimate children, all of them fighting like wolves for a piece of the corporate empire that was Zheng's birthright. The pressure began early, a constant, chilling, systemic warfare. Zheng was the legitimate heir, but legitimacy counted for little against the hungry numbers of his half-siblings and opportunistic women who circled the periphery. He learned quickly that emotion was a vulnerability and neutrality was a necessary facade. His physical appearance, the square jaw, the serious expression, the dark, controlled gaze, became an armor. The in-control demeanor that would later define his entire professional life was forged in this furnace of betrayal and competition. It was not a choice, but a necessary defense mechanism to survive the relentless scrutiny and corporate sabotage that was simply the background noise of his inheritance. His only true backing came from his paternal grandfather, the family patriarch. The patriarch was an emotionally austere man, but his commitment to the family name was absolute. He served as Zheng's sole shield, a formidable figure with the authority to keep the wolves at bay while Zheng was in his turbulent teens. When Zheng began taking the reins of the business, the old man remained a silent, powerful mentor, teaching him the ruthless precision required to manage an empire under constant internal siege. Zheng's entire young adult life became an exhausting, perpetual defense. He poured himself into the company, using his innate strategic intelligence to counter the endless scheming. He worked long hours in a sterile, modern office, trying to cement his position, aware that his time was spent fighting his own blood rather than expanding the company. The pressure was immense, a silent weight that had always been there, a cruel and constant reminder that his immense wealth only afforded him the privilege of fighting for his survival every single day. The emotional toll was a silent tax he paid without question.
Chapter 5. The watchdog falls.
The patriarch's passing was not a quiet sorrow. It was an earthquake that shook the very foundation of the corporation, tearing away Zheng's only shield. The moment the old man's iron influence lifted, the already frayed fabric of the family structure was subjected to immediate, brutal assault. Zheng's own father, desperate to secure a larger share and validate his many liaisons, led the charge. The patriarch's will, which clearly favored Zheng and minimized the influence of the countless mistresses and illegitimate sons, became a public scandal. The relatives, organized and ruthless, launched a massive public ruckus. They held sensational, tearful press conferences outside the corporate headquarters and filed endless, aggressive motions in court. Zheng found himself battling his father not over business strategy, but over the morality of the inheritance. "How dare you hide behind that piece of paper, son?" his father sneered during a tense, private meeting mediated by lawyers. The man didn't care about the company. He cared about his own wounded ego. "Your grandfather was a dinosaur. It's the 21st century. My other boys deserve their place. You keep them out, and I'll bury this company in lawsuits until the shareholders riot." The threat was clear. The father was willing to cripple the entire company if his demands for validation and wealth, and the validation of his bastard sons, were not met. Before the corporate dust could settle, Zheng was battling a dozen simultaneous injunctions challenging the validity of the patriarch's final wishes. The legal fees alone were staggering. "Sir, we can fight this for years, but the continuous lawsuits are destroying our stock valuation," Zheng's lead counsel warned him. "We need a concession to buy time, a temporary placation." Zheng was forced into a painful, strategic retreat. Leveraging the public and legal pressure, his father successfully managed to forcibly install several of the illegitimate sons, the wolves, into executive positions. They will have titles, they will have offices, and they will have access. Zheng was forced to concede, his voice tight with controlled fury. But every single transaction must be signed off by corporate compliance. They touch nothing without verification and a full board-level audit. But the wolves, lacking any business sense, corporate loyalty, or basic business know-how, viewed the company not as a legacy to protect, but as a vault to be emptied. The corporate structure was already destabilized by the lawsuits, and now the embezzlement began in earnest. The brothers, now with genuine access, used their new titles to circumvent controls. Company accounts were not just skimmed, they were systematically plundered to fund obscenely lavish lifestyles. The reports that filtered to Arjang's desk were a daily humiliation. The theft was breathtakingly brazen. He found invoices for luxury goods bought by mistresses on the company card. Lavish holiday trips overseas to exclusive islands were disguised as off-site executive retreats, complete with 5-star private villa rentals. Shopping sprees in Milan and Paris, private jet charters, and exorbitant hotel suites were signed off with a casual flick of the wrist. One of his half-brothers, appointed VP of Acquisitions, spent $500,000 on art that turned out to be forgeries, all thanks to a mistress' ill-advised suggestions, the money ending up in her greedy clutches. Even more galling were the expenses categorized under business development, high-roller casino junket trips to Macau and Vegas, and endless excessive drinking binges at KTVs. The family's ostentatious private KTVs, once a symbol of prestige, became the venue for non-stop parties, all on the company's dime. Arjang tracked one half-brother's monthly corporate expenditure, corporate theft valued at 8 figures, fueled by alcohol and the arrogance of entitlement. The systemic theft was a constant drain. Arjang was fighting 2 wars, a public, humiliating war to uphold his grandfather's legacy, and a hidden, frantic war to stop the financial bleeding caused by the very family members he was forced to endure. The constant weight of this war, coupled with the profound loneliness of having no one to trust, was quickly consuming the man who had always prided himself on absolute control.
Chapter 6. The Final Straw.
The systematic theft was devastating, but the incompetence of the parachuted executives proved terminal. The embezzlement was merely mild medieval bloodletting, whereas the ill-advised executive decisions made by the half-siblings were a decapitation. Lacking any genuine understanding of corporate strategy or long-term vision, they viewed the company's capital as an infinite personal bankroll, ripe for foolish speculation. The result was a torrent of disastrous investment choices. Funds meant for stable, long-term growth, the bedrock of the patriarch's legacy, were recklessly thrown into volatile, untested markets. One half-brother poured tens of millions into a cryptocurrency venture introduced by a gambling associate, ignoring every internal risk assessment. Another invested heavily in a chain of theme restaurants based purely on his mistress's passing comment that the food was trendy, creating massive, unrecoverable capital losses. Arjang's warnings, sent from his limited access, were consistently dismissed as the envious sniping of a defeated heir. Each failed venture was a gaping hole in the company's sinking ship, holes he desperately tried to patch with his own rapidly depleting resources and time. The consequences quickly tore through the company's operational integrity, revealing the rot at the core. The internal chaos led to a catastrophic neglect of basic business practices. Arjang discovered payrolls delayed by weeks. "The employees in the Busan factory are threatening a walkout, sir," his loyal chief of staff reported, his voice thin with panic. "We haven't paid their bonuses, and now they're saying the base salary is late. They haven't heard a word from the new VP of Finance." The VP of Finance is in Monte Carlo, negotiating a private yacht purchase with company funds, Arjang bit out, his jaw clenched. The indignities mounted. Suppliers, many of them small, long-standing businesses reliant on prompt settlement, were left waiting for months. Lawsuits piled up, not just from the family, but from furious vendors and distressed employees. The company's long-standing reputation, built over generations of careful dealing and honor, began to utterly crumble under the weight of these petty, constant betrayals. The corporate giant Jaclynn was meant to inherit, began to feel less like an empire and more like a diseased carcass surrounded by vultures. The weight of fighting the public legal battle, the hidden financial audit, and the daily corporate meltdown was no longer sustainable. Jaclynn's serious demeanor became a fragile mask for sheer exhaustion. He would stare at the reports, unable to process the numbers, the figures blurring into nonsensical smears of red ink. His famed in-control posture was now an act of pure, desperate will that frequently failed behind closed doors. He fought a losing war against insomnia, pacing his immaculate apartment night after night. He felt the pain physically, the deep ache behind his eyes, the constant low-level nausea, the shaking of his hands when he tried to pour water. The betrayal of his blood, combined with the impossible effort to keep the company afloat, finally broke the man who had always prided himself on absolute control. He understood, with terrifying clarity, that if he did not stop, the next collapse would be irreversible. His physician's diagnosis was final: severe burnout, complete mental and physical exhaustion. You are driving your heart rate to dangerous levels every single minute you try to manage this, Mr. Jung. You must stop now. You need total sensory withdrawal. Do not answer calls. Do not read the news. Do nothing. The doctor didn't mince words. The institute was not suggested as a place for healing. It was simply a necessary place to stop the inevitable fall. He arrived, a shadow of the serious, sharp man he had been, dressed in simple, rumpled institutional wear, the exhaustion evident in the profound, heavy, dark circles under his eyes. A different kind of broken than Ming Yue, but broken nonetheless, a powerful man defeated by the cumulative greed and incompetence of his own family. His arrival was silent, driven by necessity, marking the completion of his collapse.
Part 3. Redemption. Chapter 7. The Meld.
The physical silence of the institute had finally given way to a shared, hesitant quiet. Days bled into weeks, marked only by the gentle rhythm of the institute's schedule and the profound, unspoken realization that Ming Yue and Jaclynn were two halves of the same solitude. The conversation began not with a formal address, but with a question from Jaclynn, spoken so softly it barely broke the hum of the air conditioning, a tentative offer of friendship and human connection. Ming Yue responded with a voice that felt foreign, raspy from disuse, yet steady, timidly accepting his offer to sit with her in the sun-filled, flower-lined patio. At first, it was just a shared silence, but as the days passed, Jaclynn began to speak. He described not physical trauma, but his utter exhaustion. He spoke of the endless fight, the sheer mental weight of systemic betrayal, and the moment his body simply refused to hold the burden anymore. He spoke of corporate wars, heated exchanges, and cruel taunts thrown by greedy relatives. Ming Yue responded with a voice that felt foreign, raspy from disuse, yet steady. She shared Han Yu's cruel taunts and finally admitting to the physical abuse. She described the abuse not with hysteria, but with clinical detachment, the chilling, contemptuous nature of Han Yu's control. She spoke of the emotional starvation, the objectification, the feeling of being an inconvenient attachment to a financial asset. They realized then that they melded like long-lost souls. His pain was the relentless pressure of the external world. Hers was the slow erosion of the internal world. In that intimate exchange, the terms of their survival were unconsciously drawn. Zheng, logical, strategically brilliant, and profoundly stable in his intellect, offered Mingyue protection and a path toward reclaiming her life. Mingyue, quiet, emotionally insightful, and fiercely human beneath her scars, offered Zheng the one thing his ruthless corporate world could not: peace and genuine, non-judgmental acceptance. Each had exactly what the other needed to heal and to survive. The sanctuary, however, could not hold the world at bay forever. The urgent call to return came via a discreet, frantic visit from Zheng's loyal legal counsel. The news was dire. The half-siblings, emboldened by his continued absence and the stalling of the legal proceedings, had accelerated the corporate dissolution. Lawsuits were piling up, and key assets were being dangerously liquidated. The outside world was clamoring for his return, and the threat was no longer burnout. It was total corporate collapse. Zheng laid out the threat to Mingyue with cold, clear precision. He explained his inevitable departure. He expected her to retreat further into the silence, but Mingyue had found a new anchor. Her eyes, still dark and solemn, held a flicker of steel. She knew that returning to Hanyu was death, and remaining here while her protector left felt like abandonment. She knew she had to fight to deserve the life Zheng was offering. In that quiet room, she made her choice. She confirmed her intent with a simple nod, then a single, firm word: yes. She chose to leave with him, to fight back. It was her first active step of agency, breaking the protective shell of catatonia and choosing vengeance over oblivion. The sanctuary period was over.
Chapter 8. The Unclaimed Assets.
Leaving the institute was a violent shock to the system. Outside the quiet gates, the world was a cacophony of sound, harsh sunlight, and aggressive motion. Mingyue, accustomed to the muted, soft environment, immediately felt the sensory overload, the loud snarl of traffic, the sharp edges of buildings, the high contrast light that burned after weeks of gentle pastels. For a fraction of a second, her eyes went vacant, threatening to draw her back into silence. Zheng, however, was already in control, now dressed in a simple but meticulously tailored suit that reclaimed his corporate dignity. He walked with a steady, grounded force. He did not clutch her hand, but his shoulder was a constant, solid buffer against the chaos. She clung to his presence, using his focused energy as a shield against the abrasive reality of the city he was leading her back into. Their first stop was the office of a razor-sharp family lawyer, a contact of Zheng's. Zheng handled the introductory facts of the corporate sabotage and Hanyu's attempts to claim Mingyue's property. But when the lawyer turned to Mingyue, she knew she had to speak for herself. Using a voice that was low but surprisingly clear, a testament to the sanctuary's work, Mingyue spoke of the emotional starvation, the constant degradation, and the calculation behind Hanyu's cruelty. She detailed the emotional abuse that had driven her to the bridge. This was her first active step in confronting the trauma, speaking not as a victim, but as a witness. Throughout her harrowing recounting of her 5-year marriage, Zheng was a silent but stalwart companion, offering an emotional blanket to warm her soul and flow of energy through their tightly clasped hands. The lawyer, cold and professional, reviewed the thick reports Mingyue had brought from the institute. These were not just clinical notes, they were devastatingly detailed accounts of her catatonic state, the physical signs of malnutrition, and the doctor's clear assessment that her attempt was the result of sustained, severe emotional and physical torment. Step 1. Serving the papers. The lawyer immediately prepared the documents, a massive stack of files, divorce papers coupled with the extensive institute reports detailing the physical and emotional abuse, were filed and quickly served to Hanyu's downtown office. The intention was clear. This was not a quiet dissolution. this was a public testament of his cruelty. Step 2. The blind trust. Then, Ming Yue produced the final, devastating document. Quietly, she explained that her parents, anticipating Han Yu's calculating nature, had established a blind trust for her core property upon their marriage. The lawyer's eyes widened as she reviewed the documents. The assets were legally shielded, deliberately not included in the marital assets, and therefore not subject to division in the divorce. Han Yu's entire, miserable 5-year scheme to acquire her wealth was instantly neutralized. His assumption that her death would have been his final triumph was a fatal miscalculation. Back in their temporary, highly secured apartment, Zhang looked at Ming Yue, not with pity, but with profound respect. She had fought the worst battle, the internal one, and had secured their legal foundation with a devastating strategic move.
"We have them pinned," Zhang said, his voice hard. "He's cornered, and the trust is secure. Now the rest is logistics."
Ming Yue nodded. The world was still loud, still sharp, but standing beside him, she affirmed her commitment. "Zheng," she whispered, seeking shelter in his embrace. That low whisper of his name conveyed so much more. It was part plea and all desire. As he wrapped his arms around Ming Yue, she leaned up towards his ear and whispered, "I need you. I will always need you." The fear was still a dull ache, but the satisfaction of hitting back was a potent, new energy. War had just been declared and the fighting had begun, but tonight was time for the two to forge their relationship into a stronger metal. Tonight, their separate hearts became a single, unified being, beating in unison, breathing in a shared space.
Chapter 9. The Corporate Counterattack.
Zhang's return to his corporate headquarters was executed with almost military precision. His team of sharp, focused professionals, all dressed in sharp black, navy or dark grey suits, entered the main lobby, their footsteps striking the polished marbled floors in distinct and coordinated cadence. It was a show of force, a calculated act of aggression, and it had immediate impact, as immediately the volume of chaos that was ringing through the office floor died down. The phones were ringing incessantly, but the people were too stunned to even answer. The staff shared a collective sigh of hope and relief. Finally, they were getting the leadership they desperately needed. As Zhang settled into his familiar, leather-bound chair and reached for the first stack of folders, he felt a wave of belonging. This was his world, his natural habitat. He reviewed the crisis reports for an hour. The numbers: millions lost to a spurious tech startup, millions more to a forgotten land deal in Cambodia, serving only to harden his resolve. The battle began not with paperwork, but with a confrontation he had orchestrated. Zhang scheduled an immediate meeting with the key half-siblings who had overseen the worst of the plundering. The boardroom was a frozen theatre of resentment. The two eldest, Hai and Feng, entered with an air of arrogant entitlement, clearly expecting a negotiation, not a reckoning. "Well, look who decided to crawl out of his little vacation," sneered Hai, taking the head chair, a position Zheng should have occupied. "Had fun hiding from the mess you created, Zheng."
"Don't lecture me about creation, Hai." Zheng's voice was low, cutting through the arrogance like glass. "You wouldn't know a sustainable investment if it were printed on the front of the Wall Street Journal. And you certainly wouldn't know how to run a company without running off with the petty cash."
Feng threw his hands up, a performative gesture of innocence. "We kept the doors open. If you hadn't vanished when the company needed you most, maybe we wouldn't have had to make these executive decisions."
"Executive decisions? You mean the $500,000 spent on the private yacht charter for that starlet, Feng?" Zheng didn't raise his voice. He simply spoke clinical facts. "Or the $28 million lost on the cryptocurrency fund you invested in because your bookie told you it was a sure thing, Hai."
The performance was over. Jaclynn presented them with the forensic audit reports, 1,000 pages of damning, unassailable data. He didn't waste time on accusations. He presented the math.
You tried to steal from the family legacy, but what you actually did was commit fraud. And far worse, you destroyed the operational health of a company that employs thousands. I can tolerate greed. I cannot tolerate incompetence, Jaclynn stated. His eyes were glacial, the perfect embodiment of his corporate persona. As of this morning, I have successfully called the emergency meeting of the board. The vote to remove you is a formality. Your access cards are terminated. Your office keys will be left on the table. If you are not out of this building within the hour, my counsel will proceed with criminal charges for wire fraud and misappropriation of funds.
Hai exploded, pushing his chair back. You can't do this. Our father will ruin you. He'll throw you back in that asylum, you cold bastard. We will sue you until you have nothing left but the clothes on your back.
Jaclynn merely nodded to his counsel. They can sue, but they can't run an insolvent company while doing it. The system is cleansed. Get them out.
The strategic victory was absolute, but the toll was immediate and crushing. Jaclynn didn't feel triumph. He felt the sickening exhaustion of fighting his own blood. That evening, he returned to Mingyue, his body racked by delayed stress. He shed his suit jacket and tie, collapsing onto the sofa in their apartment, his head falling into his hands. His voice, usually so controlled, was raw when he finally spoke.
I won. I saved it. But I feel nothing. Empty. He lifted his gaze, his eyes shadowed, meeting Mingyue's. I had to destroy my own family to protect an asset. I feel like the machine they always wanted me to be.
Mingyue approached him slowly but confidently. She gently stroked his hair, trailing her fingers down the side of his face, and lifted his face to hers. You are doing what your grandfather taught you to do. You are not destroying your family. You are protecting the thousands of people your company employs, families who rely on the salaries you pay them, parents, children, all of them depend on you. I am so proud of you, she said, sliding into his arms and settling on his lap. Your grandfather would be proud of you too. She slowly drew his head towards hers and kissed him deeply. Her embrace, her kiss, was like a sacrament, a benediction, a balm on his tortured soul. Slowly, tension bled out of his body as Mingyue's caresses warmed his tensed muscles. Her slender fingers reaching for buttons, snaps and zips, eager to get to the supple, taut skin beneath. You are not a machine, Jaclynn, she whispered, her voice low and intimate. You saved the people your father would have ruined. You stood up to the darkness. That is not cold. That is courage. She pushed at his shoulders, silently indicating that he should lie face down on the sofa. Her hands found the knots of tension in his shoulders, working slow, firm magic into the muscle. The exhaustion was so profound, it bordered on the sensual. The deep ache in his body was finally being recognized, accepted, and soothed by her warmth. It was a profound role reversal. Mingyue, the previously catatonic woman, was now the anchor, providing the quiet, non-judgmental acceptance that healed the wound of corporate war. In the intimate silence, he felt the terrible isolation he had endured for years begin to melt away. He was protected, finally, by genuine strength, not by wealth or titles. He was safe to simply exist, his victory earned, his pain shared.
Chapter 10. The Double Header.
The dual vengeance strike began to take shape. The first blow landed directly on Han Yu at the height of a critical merger negotiation. Served with divorce papers that detailed his emotional, physical, and psychological abuse, coupled with the shocking revelation that the property he had coveted was legally untouchable via the blind trust, his famed control shattered. Han Yu, the man who prided himself on his impeccable composure, erupted in a silent, furious rage. He didn't yell in the office, but the sound of an ornate crystal glass shattering against a wall in his private study was loud enough to send his assistant scrambling. His face, usually a study in cold calculation, was contorted with a primal fury. He had staked his reputation and 5 years of patient, subtle cruelty on acquiring Mingyu's wealth. He realized that she wasn't just alive, she was fighting back, armed with the evidence of his own depravity and a legal firewall built by her parents. His reaction was pure, desperate malice, focusing his remaining energy on threats of defamation and countersuits, determined to destroy her dignity if he couldn't have her money.
Meanwhile, Ah-jung was executing the financial firewall. Working from his office, the drama was measured in complex spreadsheets and legal motions, but the impact was devastating. He and his team systematically dismantled the power structure of his half-siblings. He initiated immediate asset freezes, successfully called in key loans tied to their bad investments, and unleashed a torrent of forensic audits that demanded accountability for every single stolen dollar, from the KTV tabs to the European shopping sprees. His strategy was brutal in its precision. He didn't chase them with threats. He simply cut off their oxygen supply, effectively suffocating them in their own hubris. The entitlement of the half-siblings evaporated the moment their lavish cash flow was severed. They were exposed, financially strapped, and legally liable. Ah-jung's quiet strategy was proving far more destructive than open corporate warfare. The emotional satisfaction for Ah-jung was seeing the complex, greedy system of betrayal dismantled piece by piece. Justice through financial mathematics. The corporate squeeze and the personal legal battle proceeded in parallel, both rapidly moving toward a single, unavoidable point of convergence.
In the temporary apartment, Mingyue and Ah-jung reviewed the final logistics. They knew that the divorce and the property confrontation would force a face-to-face meeting with Han Yu. The man would be desperate, malicious, and dangerous. Ah-jung confirmed the date and time, his voice low and steady. He was preparing for a final showdown in which his physical presence and legal strategy would be the shield, allowing Mingyue to deliver the emotional coup de grace. Their evenings always began the same way. A quiet meal together served as both a source of sustenance, both physical and emotional. It allowed them to connect and share their separate battles and celebrate their small, incremental successes. Later, in the dark, quiet of their bedroom, the new lovers would further deepen their burgeoning relationship through a tactile journey of discovery that brought emotional comfort and sensual pleasure, culminating in exhausted slumber that would see them curled around each other, two halves of a whole, a physical representation of yin and yang, when
Chapter 11. The Final Showdown.
The mediation suite was high above the city, a space of glass and polished steel, the kind of setting Han Yu loved. He was already seated at the wide mahogany table, flanked by his lawyers, his face a mask of furious, concentrated malice. His eyes, usually cold, burned with a desperate fury. Mingyue and Ah-jung entered, their presence a deliberate, unified statement. Ah-jung was impeccably tailored, his form radiating an unshakable calm that felt heavier than the marble table. Mingyue, standing beside him, was not hiding. She wore a simple, tailored, dark dress. Her posture was straight, and the light in her eyes was steady, though solemn.
Ah-jung settled into his chair, placing his hand on the table. A clear boundary between Mingyue and the villain. He was the impenetrable shield, and Han Yu knew it.
Han Yu didn't address the lawyers. He fixed his gaze entirely on Mingyue, hoping to trigger the catatonic retreat he had induced so perfectly. He had to break her, or he would lose his reputation completely. "So, the hysterical hag has returned," Han Yu sneered, his voice low and contemptuous. "You expect to abandon your duties, stage a pathetic suicide attempt, and then crawl back to demand a settlement. You truly are a spoiled, useless child. You left your property like a pathetic mess, and you expect to walk away clean." Ming Yue felt the familiar sting of Han Yu's venom, but realized it no longer hurt. This was just the desperate screeching of a man who had lost control. Han Yu leaned forward, his voice dropping to a vicious whisper intended only for her. "I know where you were. That asylum. I can leak the reports, Ming Yue. I can tell the world what a certified, broken lunatic you are. Do you think anyone will trust your word then? You'll be ruined. Your reputation, your family's good name, all gone. Go back to your padded room. You are nothing without me to validate you." He thought the threat of exposure, of the shame of mental illness, would be her breaking point. Ming Yue did not flinch. She placed her hands flat on the table, her expression utterly calm. She had already survived the worst of him. "I am demanding nothing, Han Yu," she replied, her voice low, clear, and perfectly steady. "Everything you seek is already protected. The trust was secured from the moment we married. You married a legal firewall, not a wife." She pushed the file of the Institute's reports across the table, not in anger, but in documentation. "These reports confirm that I sought oblivion not out of weakness, but because you systematically and intentionally tried to break me. Your contempt led to a crisis of life. That is not weakness. That is proof of your cruelty." She looked directly at his enraged face. "You tried to ruin me, but you only ruined yourself. You are merely an inconvenience now, a failed experiment." The use of his own words against him struck Han Yu like a physical blow. He pushed his chair back violently, the sound echoing through the room. "You absolute bitch! You think I'm going to sign this? I will destroy every—"
"You will sign it," Arjun interrupted, his voice cutting through Han Yu's hysteria with lethal calm. He placed his hand firmly on Ming Yue's shoulder, a non-verbal affirmation of their unified strength. "The divorce is uncontested based on the evidence presented, and the trust is secure. If you drag this out, the documentation of your domestic abuse will be presented in full public trial, destroying your professional reputation permanently. You have one option left: silence and surrender."
The legal argument was undeniable. Han Yu, defeated by Ming Yue's dignity and Zheng's strategic shield, finally slumped back, signing the papers with a desperate, ugly flourish of his pen. The confrontation was finished. Ming Yue's divorce was granted, her property secured, her dignity restored. At that exact moment, Zheng's lead lawyer, sitting efficiently beside him, received a message and discreetly slid a final document onto the table. "Sir, the board's emergency meeting is complete. The last of the injunctions have been dropped. The expulsion of the specified parties is final, and the corporate control has been transferred. The legal cleanup is complete." Zheng glanced down at the document, the absolute confirmation of his corporate victory. The corruption had been purged. The corporation was secured. He pushed the document away and squeezed Ming Yue's shoulder. He had achieved two things simultaneously: corporate justice and protecting the woman he loved. The two streams of their trauma had converged into one powerful shared victory. Ming Yue had silenced her tormentor, and Zheng had protected his grandfather's legacy. They stood up together and walked out, leaving the sound of Han Yu's defeated sputtering behind them.
Chapter 12. The Rising Tide.
The weeks following the final confrontation were dedicated to the soothing process of completion. Zheng's victory in the corporate world was finalized swiftly and quietly, executed with the same cold precision he had used to dismantle the opposition. He secured the full corporate control, expelling the corrupt family members with no negotiation. only demands for accountability. He was no longer fighting for the company. He was governing it. The source of his profound exhaustion, the constant war against his own blood, was closed forever. Han Yu's defeat was absolute. Stripped of Ming Yue's property and facing professional ruin from the disclosed abuse reports, he was left with only his perfect, empty penthouse and his toxic, impotent rage. They left the temporary apartment and found their new permanent space, a dwelling designed for balance. It was modern but soft, spacious but without the cold, echoing feel of excess. It was a home where sound could travel without demanding attention, and where sunlight fell without casting aggressive shadows. It was here, in the quiet intimacy of their new sanctuary, that their love truly flourished. The scars were visible and permanent, but they were no longer wounds. They were the shared history of their survival. One evening, Jung returned home. He shed his suit jacket, his expression softer, more relaxed than Ming Yue had ever seen it. He sat beside her, simply holding her hand, his gaze direct, the tension finally gone from the rigid lines of his jaw.
"I only survived because I met you," he said, his voice deep and slightly rough. "My logic was only capable of saving the company. But your quiet strength saved my soul. I was fighting for control. You taught me to fight for a life worth controlling."
Ming Yue leaned into him, her hand tracing the prominent line of his shoulder. She was no longer the fragile ghost. Her gaze was luminous, the slight curve of her lips a genuine smile. "You were the only thing strong enough to pull me out of the silence. You gave me a path back to life. I was fighting for oblivion. You taught me to fight for peace." Their connection was fierce and mature, a bond built on shared trauma and the mutual recognition that they possessed exactly what the other needed. His reclaimed stability provided her the safety to feel. Her profound humanity regrounded his soul, reminding him that the warmth he lacked was real, not just a liability. The nights became a profound confirmation of this union. Their intimacy was slow, deliberate, and trusting. There was no demand, no performance, only the gentle, reverent exchange of comfort and desire. The quiet acts of love were the final physical expression of their healing, affirming that their bodies, once subjected to neglect and abuse, were now safe, protected, and deeply desired. The profound comfort he offered her quieted the last echoes of Han Yu's contempt, while her presence provided a profound, sensual peace that he had never known in his years of corporate warfare. They decided to marry. The wedding was small, sincere, and entirely focused on their bond, a direct, deliberate rejection of the cold, transactional formality of Ming Yue's previous life. There were no flashing cameras, no large corporate banners, just the judge, their most trusted corporate staff, and Ming Yue's loyal lawyer who had become their friend. Ming Yue wore a simple, elegant ivory dress, her hair flowing, her face alight with quiet confidence. Jung watched her, no longer wearing the armor of the cold air, but the steady gaze of a man finally at peace. They exchanged vows that spoke not of property or social standing, but of mutual guardianship and endless quiet understanding. When they kissed, it was not the required formality of a corporate merger, but the profound, deep kiss of two people who had nearly died and had only found life again in the absolute strength and stillness of the other. They walked out together, hand in hand, the sun catching the confident, eased lines of Zheng's face and illuminating the quiet, powerful happiness in Ming Yue's eyes. The darkness was behind them, the wreckage of their past successfully purged, and ahead the tide was rising. The end.
You have been listening to a book written by Jaclynn, published by Azure Silk. About the author. Jaclynn is a storyteller who finds harmony between fact and the fiction. After a 15-year career in global treasury markets, She now dedicates her creative energy to exploring the beauty of human relationships through literature and digital art. Under the pen name Jaclynn Toe, she crafts narratives that bridge cultural heritage with modern emotional landscapes. Thank you for listening. Copyright notice. This production is copyright 2026 by Jaclynn Toe. All rights reserved. No part of this recording or the associated story may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author. For more works and updates, visit the Azure Silk YouTube channel